Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Roberta McIntyre. I'm the President CEO of FireSafe Sonoma. FireSafe Sonoma is Sonoma County's countywide Fire Safe Council. We provide education and outreach to the folks in and around Sonoma County with regard to wildland fire safety. So that's our goal. We help with grant writing. We act as fiscal sponsor for folks that need it. And we also, to some degree, can provide some project management for grant funded projects where we have that agreement built in. So that's what we do. We've been working in this space for over 23 years. So we've been around the block a bit and we've gotten a little busy like all of us the last few years. So with that said, let's see, for those of you that are new to the Alliance meetings, what we do is we try to do these monthly with a specific presenter to present a topic of interest that we think is of interest. We want these things to be valuable to you guys. Don't want it to be a waste of time. We want some good takeaways when you leave the meeting and things that you could take back to your organizations or use, to make yourself more wildland fire safe down the road. Some housekeeping items. Like I already mentioned, put your name and organization in the chat, or change your name either way. You could put it in the chat too. I like it if you change it on your screen name better. Please keep yourself muted during the presentation. Once I switch over to our presenters, I'll do the same. And yeah, and then I think it'll be a small enough group to where we won't have to raise our hands when we get into the Q&A session. But if it does start to get a little busy, I'll just ask folks to start raising their hand. But on the front end of that, if you feel like you have something to say, just be respectful and try not to interrupt each other. And then Mason's my helper. Once again, he's an AmeriCorps fellow in the Grizzly Corps program. He's here to assist. So thank you, Mason, for helping out. And then just so y'all know, we are recording. So, in this particular presentation, we may make the presentation available. We probably will because of the information, and folks that can't make it, they want this information. And then also I wanted to ask folks, if you don't mind, in the chat, let me know who is okay with sharing this with our presenters. They asked me earlier if it'd be okay if they had your guys' information, and I go, I can't just carte blanche give it away. But if you're okay with the presenters having your email address, let us know in the chat. Will that work for you guys, Edgar and Gean, if we do it that way?
Yes, that'll work.
Okay, cool. So I'll leave it to you guys then to save the chat at the end, and then yeah, that way you'll have the folks' email address. So we'll do it that way. So if you're okay with sharing your email address with the presenters, put your email address, your name and email address in the chat. And then Edgar and Gean, if you guys remember to save the chat toward the end, then you will have that information. Will that work? I think that'll work. Clear as a bathroom window, right?
I hope not, but yes, very clear. That works.
Yeah, and then as we go, Mason will drop little Easter eggs in the chat that we typically do for Fire Safe Sonoma, our contact information and our donate link and stuff like that. So with that said, I'm going to cover 3 topics that are real popular right now with regard to Fire Safe Sonoma in the county of Sonoma. Just that you know that those that aren't aware, we did get funding for a coordinator position for 1 year. So it'll be a limited term, 1 year full-time position for an executive coordinator to help out with Fire Safe Sonoma. We have not hired that person yet. We just formed a group, an ad hoc group or a subcommittee, whatever you want to call it, to work on bringing that person on board, getting the informational flyer out, getting the recruitment information out, and getting them on board. It's hoped that we'll get them hired within a couple of months and then onboarded shortly after that. So that's the plan. And then they will work for us for 12 months. And then in a perfect world, they will be able to get some funding streams established to maybe keep them on at least part-time down the road, ideally full-time. That's the plan. And Scott, did you guys got funding for a coordinator as well, right? Um,
Yeah, we did. Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah.
Yep, it is awesome. Hopefully we'll all work together.
Yeah, if you have any ideas or if you want to put our heads together in terms of moving those endeavors forward, um, we might want to put our heads together and see how you guys are doing it compared to how we're doing it. We might be able to learn from each other. I know I could learn from you. I always do.
Ditto. Yeah, we're actually doing interviews tomorrow, so we're.
Oh, you're ahead of us. Okay. Wow. So, okay. We'll see. I can learn from you. um, and then Sonoma County's in the midst of, on the front end of doing a tax measure that may be on the ballot in June, as early as June. If not June, probably November. So I'm kind of up to my eyeballs in that personally and a little bit representing Fire Safe Sonoma. But I want to make sure that that goes well and that the money, I want the measure to be a success, and I want it to be successful to the degree that the public gets what they want out of that endeavor. So, yeah, so that's in the works. And then the CWPP is the draft, current draft, near final draft is in the hands of the county supervisors. So they're reviewing it at as we speak. They have it in their hands reviewing it. And then what we're doing, the core team is meeting with each of the supervisors one-on-one, basically, and running through it with them and answering any questions they may have about it. And Esther from Digital Mapping Solutions is here. She's the current, I think, champion of the CWPP endeavor. She's one of the leaders on the core team. Esther, do you want to kind of fill us in with what it's looking like and how it's going, just real quick, maybe less than 5 minutes if you could?
Sure. Less than 5 minutes. I can do it in less than a minute.
Reader's Digest version.
The Reader's Digest version. So the draft document is circulating with the Board of Supervisors right now. And as soon as we get comments from them, hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be, I guess, announcing the draft document for public review. So there'll be a chance for everybody to take a look at it and tear it apart. Hopefully not too much, because I don't want to add more stuff to it. It's unfortunately, we had planned for a 50-page document. It's closer to, I think, 350. And so it ballooned, unfortunately. And so, but we will also have public meetings at the beginning of January, and the announcements for those meetings will be out on January 5th. And I can put the dates in the chat later on.
Oh, yeah.
Just so that you guys can, get that on your calendar ahead of time. And then what else? We're wrapping it up. We're almost done.
Yeah, well, thanks, Esther. And I think that all things considered, considering the limited funds the county had to put towards that endeavor, I think the county got a good deal because, I looked at the draft last week in its current form, and I'm looking at this thinking, wow, this is more than I thought we were going to get for the money that was invested. So thank you, Esther. I know you put a lot of extra time and effort into it, so appreciate that. And I really think that the county's getting a good value for the money spent in that CWPP. I don't think it's as robust as a lot of us hoped it would be, but the county just didn't put enough money towards it, in my opinion, to make it as robust as I had hoped, and others as well. But with that said, I think that we still got a really good final product for the money spent. I mean, it's a good value, is what I'm trying to say, I think.
Thank you, and yeah, and I wish we had more budget for outreach and stuff, because that was definitely a part that was lacking. But step by step, next one will be better.
Yes, absolutely. 5 years, I think is the plan, is to do it again in 5 years.
Yep.
Okay, and then I'm gonna try to end this meeting at 3:30. I don't have a time constraint personally. This time last month I did. So if you guys want to go a little longer and do our little parking lot discussion after, I'm up for that. Just have open dialogue about whatever. And then when we go into breakout rooms, time permitting, what I'll probably do is do 3 breakout rooms, one to talk about the CWPP. And Esther, if you could champion that group, that would be awesome. And then I will do a breakout group to talk about the tax measure. I'll champion that group or facilitate that group. And then if you, Gean, and Edgar wouldn't mind facilitating a breakout group to talk about the crossings, the topic of the day, then that would be ideal. Is that okay with the 3 of you or the 2 of you?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, dog. With that said, Edgar and Gean of the American Concrete Pipe Association, they're here to give us a presentation on what I call concrete crossings as opposed to combustible crossings. And when I say crossings, that's the technical engineering term, I think, that's used for structures that go across gorges in the earth. Not sure if I'm doing the definition justice, but when I was the fire marshal and engineer, we were talking about bridges, and he said, well, technically what we're talking about is crossings, because crossings could be culverts, they could be, a flatbed rail car, they could be a wood bridge, they could be a steel structural bridge. There's all crossings that go over streams, rivers, creeks, gorges, whatever, drainages, come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and forms. And one of the things we learned from recent fires is the vulnerability of crossings that are made out of wood, or even a rail crossing that's steel but has wooden decking on it. And these guys from American Concrete Pipe Association, Edgar and Gean, they're going to give us a couple case studies, I think, of recent fires. I think the Tufts Fire is one of your case studies, where you learned a lot about the vulnerabilities of wooden crossings as opposed to non-combustible crossings or concrete crossings in your case. So with that said, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, do a little short bio, and then we'll dive into the presentation from there, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you, Roberta. Let me get this PowerPoint up for you guys. Nothing's better than having a presentation by a couple engineers. So if you guys could let me know if you guys could see this presentation that I have up on the screen, and maybe a thumbs up or something in the chat. Roberta, could you hear me and see this presentation? Okay, there you go.
Looks good, loud and clear, looks great.
Awesome. I want to thank you and the rest of this group here for allowing us to speak to you guys. This is could be a 2 to 3 hour presentation that we made sure to condense closer to 30 minutes. So we won't put you all to sleep today, but hopefully everyone takes away something pretty entertaining and educational, and more or less, we're here for the network too. So pleased to meet you. And again, thank you for inviting us to this group here. And it looks like you guys have a great thing going on. The American Concrete Pipe Association is also a 501c3 nonprofit organization, where our existence is just to promote the benefits of concrete pipe or box culverts. Roberta, you kind of mentioned gorges, bridges, etc. The short answer is, yeah, you're right. That is what we do. Primarily, we produce culverts to convey water, and culverts, there's 2 components. Just to get a little engineering with you guys, culverts need to convey liquid, and it has to be a structure. So that's the only engineering stuff that I'm going to talk about with you guys. Edgar, you want to introduce yourself to the group, and then we'll get to the presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us here. Thank you, Roberta, for giving us the opportunity to speak. As Gean said, we're presenting as the American Concrete Pipe Association. I work actually for Forterra, which is a concrete precast manufacturer out of Sacramento. We do have another plant in Southern California, and we do a lot of work with the Caltrans and all the local agencies and stuff like that, where We provide pipe for the culverts or box culverts, whatever they need. But I've been in the industry for about 25 years and with Forterra for close to 6 years. So with that, I'll pass it on to Gean.
Yeah, so my contact information is right there on the screen. You know, happy to take any calls, text, or emails. Just don't use my email for spam emails when you're signing up for some free something or using my number. I have a spam email for that you guys could use. So again, the ACPA, we comprise of 5 manufacturers: Forterra, who Edgar's with, Oldcastle, Precon, Rinker, and Thompson Pipe Group. These are 5 precast manufacturers that's pretty much the majority of all the precasters here in the state of California. And I'm the director for this association. So we kind of talked about who our speakers are. Once again, my name is Gean, and that's Edgar over there. And Edgar, you're going to jump in here and there to share this presentation with me. So we wanted to talk about 5 things with you guys here today that we put on the email blast for you guys. And number 1 is defensible roadways, maybe not defensible space that most of you are accustomed to speaking about, but defensible roadways, post-wildfire hazards. We have some case studies like Roberta mentioned, some regulations that are relevant that has been passed in the past and stuff that we care about that, of course, firefighters like yourself would be pleased to have passed. Some poor decisions that lead to costly repairs. We definitely wanted to talk why we're here talking about resilient infrastructure as opposed to things that could burn away, right? We're not a big fan of things burning and then paying 6 times as much for it, right? And lastly, community engagement. Our association is committed to promoting resilient infrastructure for public safety. Let's be honest, my industry would love to sell more of our product, but we care more about keeping people safe. The heart and soul of us are civil engineers, and that's our creed, public safety and public safety first before profit. So that's kind of the agenda today. And let me just jump right into it before I put you guys all to sleep with all this really nerdy engineering stuff here. So again, with resilient infrastructure, we have a definition that didn't come from us, but that came from the American Society of Civil Engineers. So Edgar, if you could read this out to the group, please, while I take my glass of water.
So this is basically the definition is resilience refers to the capability to mitigate against significant all hazards, risk, and incidents and to expeditiously recover and constitute critical service with minimum damage to public safety and health, the economy, and national security. Sorry if I sounded too much like a robot.
Edgar, thank you. And I wanted to start off with that definition first, because there's kind of 2 big buzzwords going on at the Capitol. One, sustainability, and one is resilience. And I would say the 2 are just as important to each and every one of us. But right now, with everything that's been going on in the past couple of years, I think the idea of being resilient is just as important as being sustainable, because if you are resilient by nature, then you're already sustainable. Sometimes if you're sustainable, you're not necessarily resilient. So I don't think it's a 2-way road, but I do think the 2 are very important. So without me touting about the benefits of concrete pipe, I wanted to let kind of the history speak for itself, but we do have some stuff I wanted to talk to you guys about. Roberta, you mentioned some of the gorges and bridges and what have you. I would say in what culverts are, in a very layman terms definition, is just to get water from one side of something to the other. So if you look at this image here, you obviously see this roadway. You see things that could burn here along the side, which of course you firefighters are very aware of. And you can see some space here that probably won't burn away. This is good. This is called defensible space. Now, what the covert in this scenario is, you have a higher elevation of water that wants to go from this side of the road over to the left. That's a covert, very simple. Over here looks like riprap. This prevents erosion. So I believe everyone kind of have seen this before, and this is what we're here to talk about today. Our industry, the American Concrete Pipe Association, we manufacture products that help convey water from one side to the other and prevent this roadway from structurally failing. And that's what is very important to us, because that is the definition of resilience to us. So here's a picture of those of you that live up in the Bay. I'm actually from Southern California, so I have a worse version of this traffic, but I showed this picture just to just to irk a lot of you people here, this is our life. We live on the roads. For me, I probably spend as much time on the road, almost as much as I sleep. So I hate traffic. I take the 5 freeway and the 405 down here in Southern California. So it's just as bad as here as you're seeing in this image, if not worse. So just trying to get your mental juices to flow here while I show you some other pictures. Here's a picture up in Northern California. This is post campfire. I don't know if you guys can see this as obviously as I do, but here's the obvious fire in the back. And here are the vehicles going in that direction. Now, I know I got a really high level education here with just a bachelor's degree, but I have a lot of common sense. We don't want vehicles or people going towards the fire, right? We would want them to go away from the fire. You don't touch the stove when it's hot, you move your hand away from the stove. You know, it's common sense. So just again, trying to get you guys to think about this stuff. This is a Netflix documentary about the campfire itself. I'm sure you all have heard about it and probably saw it a couple of times. Some of you probably had to get the tissue box out, just like I almost did. I would never cry because I'm a tough guy, right? But this imagery, I think, is great. There's other pictures that I'm going to show from the campfire, but this is real. This happened, and those of you probably know this better than I do. So I wanted to mention a plan that was put out by the governor's office. And again, I apologize if you guys have talked about this or are well versed in this document. I just think this is a great kind of platform to talk about, and it'll kind of segue into our case studies. So this is the California's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. And within this document, there's one figure that I wanted to really highlight to all of you, and then kind of come back to why we're here talking about coverts. So here's just a blow up of this figure number 4 that reads, public roads with defensible fuel profile zone. You guys are all aware of this. For private properties, there's CAL FIRE that here to remove some fire fuels along the roadways. And then there's the US Forest Service taking care of fire fuels on the right side. This imagery is very representative of kind of the barrier around homes, but we need to protect our roadways. And why? If you're to put yourself in the campfire situation and your home is already on fire, your neighbor's already on fire, and you need to evacuate. How do you evacuate? You obviously evacuate in your car on the roadway. But what if, God forbid, what if that roadway collapsed? What if the roadway prevents a school bus from getting out with children inside of the vehicle? Now, these are all a lot of what ifs, but these are all real world scenarios that I'm not making up. And I apologize if this comes off a little dark, and I'm not here to try to scare you, but these are just some examples of historical events that has happened. So some post-wildfire hazards and lessons learned. I'm gonna hand this over to Edgar and let him talk about some of the lessons learned, and I'll come back to you guys.
We'll start with the first case study is the Tufts Fire that happened in Santa Rosa in 2017. It was one of the first high-profile fires that we had out here in California. I mean, there's been others, but that's kind of when everything started hitting home, where more fires and the fire season started extending itself throughout the years. But in this fire, just like the text says, there was about 5,000 homes that were destroyed. And unfortunately, 23 people were killed. And also a lot of the storm drains were melted underground. And it also created a risk for collapse or slides with the upcoming rains after the fires. And then this next slide, we'll show a video of Caltrans inspecting all the storm culverts in the city and in the fire zone. And I'll just let the video play out.
The city of Santa Rosa has discovered that some sections of underground storm drain pipe in Fountain Grove caught fire and burned in various locations during the recent wildfires. The destruction of these pipes has resulted in underground voids and cavities that could cause sinkholes and an increased chance of landslides and flooding during upcoming rainstorms. The city of Santa Rosa, along with Sonoma County and state partners, have deployed specialized crews throughout Fountain Grove to assess for destroyed pipe areas. The crews are using closed-circuit television inspection systems to get a clear look inside the storm drain pipes. Small cameras are mounted on a remote-controlled system that is steered through the storm drain pipe. The camera then transmits the video back to a monitor so crews can see the path inside the pipe. This technology allows staff to pinpoint the extent of damage within each pipe, as well as the exact location where the damage exists. You can see in this storm drain, damage was discovered about 52 feet within the pipe system. A blockage in the pipe indicates where the plastic pipe had melted during the fire, closing off the pipe and causing a buildup of debris. In other cases, entire sections of pipe have burned away and erosion has occurred underground following the recent rains. Repairs will be made to this and other underground pipes to prevent water from building up or causing additional damage. Assessments and monitoring of all the storm drain system in fire-affected areas will continue in order to ensure the safety of the community. However, with more rain on the way, residents are urged to be prepared and stay alert. If you see evidence of flooding, buckling of roadways or sidewalks,
That was a video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is another case study, and this happened in Southern California. It was in Saddle Ranch development. And what was funny about this inlets and storm drains burning, it was that it was about a little over a mile away from where the fire was at. So these storm drains caught fire because of the hot ambers that get blown away and carried over by the wind and stuff. They went into the openings and it started burning. This is also a video.
There's fire actually coming through the manholes at Porter Ranch up at the Ralphs up here. That's pretty crazy. I've never seen that before. A lot of flames coming through there. So it's underground at this moment. There's some more over here coming through another vent. That's wild.
So how this happened, here we show some damages, some pipe that was damaged there, burned. What was kind of insane about this was that it's a private development, so the city didn't have anything to do with it. The private developer owns this development, and it was actually a commercial site. What they did was replace the burnt culverts with the same material. So it kind of makes me think of insanity, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, thinking that you're going to get a different result. But unfortunately, it was replaced with the same material. So this was a place where they didn't learn the lesson and stuff.
Yeah, we have another video here. Let me play this to you guys, and I'll kind of narrate what you're looking at. So this is part of the existing HDPE, which is high density polyethylene, another type of plastic material. These are the corrugations right here. And then what you're looking at here are where the soil left the cavity of the corrugation. So this entire plastic liner that I would call it just literally disintegrated into the air. So this is a video taken of that same video that we showed earlier. What you're looking at now is the entire soil support collapsed. Now, the scary part is on top of the roadway, it looks okay. And there were vehicles driving on top of it, but down below you can see that this roadway is collapsed. So God forbid if someone were to drive over that thing and then there was a sinkhole. Again, these are real world situations, and this is how people can fatally get hurt. Shortly after this video was released, the developer closed off that roadway and they fixed it. It took them about a week or two to fix it. But let alone there's been a handful of vehicles that drove over it. So I think that developer is lucky not to get a really nasty lawsuit if something were to happen. Turn my video back on for all of you. So I wanted to talk about the campfire, and I apologize for those of you that kind of are numb to talk about what happened there in the town of Paradise, but you're going to get my version of the story, I guess. A little bit more of an engineering flair as opposed to kind of the things that we hear up in the media. So this is an image of actual campfire when they're escaping. So I wanted to show this roadway here. This seems to be okay. The road seems to be intact, but that was not the case for all the roads. I visited the campfire as soon as it was available and met with the Public Works Director, Mark Maddox. and I met with one of his inspectors, and he showed me what he learned and kind of the lessons learned. And the poor inspector told me about how he wasn't able to find his kids for 2 hours when the fire started. So I saw the pain in his eyes, and seeing a grown man nearly cry in front of me was not something that I wish I had ever had to experience. But so I have to tell that story. Let me go on here. These are actual images from the campfire itself, and this is the some of the devastation. And this last image here is probably the most difficult pill to swallow, because this is a school bus that burned. And again, if you watch that documentary, there's a scene in there that talks about how the kids were literally crying and thinking that they were going to die. And hearing those teachers tell that story is something to remember. There was an investigative report that was done by another nonprofit organization like mine. This was the Campfire Paradise report, damage report. Talks about the various materials along the roadway, whether it be cement or asphalt roadways, some of the guardrails, or some of the materials underneath, right? And that's what I'm here to talk about: awareness of storm drains, pipes, whether it's concrete, plastic, or metal. But there's one particular image that I wanted to talk to you all about, and it kind of ties back into what I mentioned earlier. The roadway appeared to be intact. We're lucky that this roadway in this figure here did not collapse. This, if some of those school buses that were trying to get out and this roadway collapsed, the number of deaths would have been increased significantly. I would say we kind of dodged a bullet as a human society here. This type of culvert with the plastic material is almost asking to be burned. Just to give you guys a sneak peek, we're actually going to show you a video of what happens when we burn concrete or plastic pipes at the end of this that we did last week. So we'll show you that. Oops, apologize. There's a video that ENR put together, and where they interviewed Mark Maddox from the town of Paradise, where he talks about some of the culverts that he witnessed after that fire. So I'll let him kind of speak for himself in this video.
The damage we experienced here at this intersection was the most costly probably for traffic signals. We lost a complete, mast arm and pole. As far as the biggest impact though, absolutely is our culverts, and any pipes essentially constructed of plastic melted in the fire. We used to do about 25, 35 single family homes on a good year. And so in this type of situation, we're obviously hopeful for hundreds and eventually thousands of homes to be rebuilt per year. We're having planning, visioning sessions about what strengths and weaknesses did the community have before, and what are our opportunities moving forward to have a safer place to live. Otherwise, we're working on our phase 2 of our tree assessment and removal. We've estimated well over 300,000 dead and dying trees within town limits. What's the one thing that I look back and I'm sure glad we did and did it well? Would be absolutely educating the public and working with them. We practiced one-way evacuation, to where in an evacuation event, there may be a circumstance where you need to drive on the wrong side of the road, as counterintuitive as that sounds. But that decision and that training, that education, that participation by the public saved so many lives on November 8th.
Moving on here, kind of talk about switching kind of gears a little bit. From a state and local level perspective, plastic culverts and its flammability has been studied by Caltrans. Caltrans does allow the use of this plastic material, but does have guidance from a state level on what the local district engineers should do. It's not a mandate whether or not they are allowed to use flammable materials underneath the road or not. But this is a study. I would say it's their due diligence to see whether or not it's acceptable to use plastic pipes. Kind of the Cliff Notes version of the study would say you shouldn't use plastic pipe, but if you do, you need to put reinforced concrete pipe at the ends of the material so that the ends won't start the fire and then and then burn the entire segment. So I just kind of wanted to show you that. Obviously, from our end, we wish that a state agency like Caltrans would be a little bit more direct about how to protect public safety. But of course, there's other factors involved that Caltrans would have to consider: economics, material availability, competition, and I respect those things. I just kind of just put safety first in my perspective. This is kind of the most interesting map, and you guys should all be familiar with this. This is kind of the high fire maps that CAL FIRE puts together. And this is the map of Town of Paradise, right? It's pretty much just bloody red. The local map is basically saying all this is high fire zone. And we know from the past videos and the pictures that we just showed you that this agency or development group use a lot of flammable materials, let alone we knew of this, right? So what are we doing, you know, as a human race? We're like throwing matches to the fire and hoping it's not going to catch on fire. So I just wanted to show you that. I just think that we can do better collectively. There's a few bills here. Edgar, you want to take these away?
All right, I guess I should take myself off of mute, but sure. This was passed late 2019, and it's basically Senate Bill 999, which gives you a guidance as a for safety element for the protection of the community from a reasonable risk associated with the effects of various geological and seismic hazards, flooding, and wildfires. So this is basically to identify any potential hazard and improve on it, make maybe the roads more efficient and resilient, and specifically routes that are going to be used in evacuation, emergency evacuation routes. Gean?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just trying to move these slides. Here you go.
This is another Senate bill. It was part of that California report that Gean mentioned earlier that showed the defensible roadways. And this is just basically assisting general plans. Caltrans will assist cities and counties in updating their general plan safety elements under AB 747. Gean did mention that there's some guidance that Caltrans puts out. So this is basically what they're instructed to do, work with cities and counties and make the roads more resilient. This is another Senate bill, and it's basically identifying subdivision secondary emergency access, where it does say at the end of the paragraph, in consultation with CAL FIRE and the impacted local governments, BOF shall develop recommendations to improve the subdivision fire safety. So basically any new subdivision or any private developments, they do advise to make sure that there's some evacuation routes in and out of that area, and specifically more than one evacuation route. Because like I believe in Paradise, there was only 2 evacuation routes in and out of the town, and only one of them was accessible during the fire. So this is kind of trying to make those evacuations get some improvement on them. And as we mentioned, Caltrans does give a guidance. It's basically this from their highway design manual, section 855. And this basically that says designers should consider limiting alternatives to non-flammable pipe or providing non-flammable end treatment on culverts subject to burning or melting. And as Gean explained it, the study that they did, DRISI, they evaluated nationwide what other agencies were doing, and they came to the conclusion that they were doing enough. So some of the things that we do, that Gean and I go around doing, is giving awareness to engineers that'll work on designing the new culverts or designing subdivisions or anything like that, just to make them aware that Caltrans does give a guidance. Like it says, it's not a directive, but it is a guidance. So we take it upon ourselves to make everyone aware of it. There is some guidance out there to not use flammable products. And I mean, every product has its place, but we're trying to promote the non-flammable products for culverts in emergency access areas. The picture on the right is a burnt culvert, and I believe it was for District 1 and Caltrans. They had it in their Facebook, but as Gean explained on the other fires, this culvert melted, and you could just see the ribs that were left over from the burnt culvert, and that's just the soil. This is another I guess, suggestion or guidance that was put forward by County of San Diego. and it was from a fire that they experienced back in, I believe, 2003. And they give the same guidance, due to poor performance of ACPA, which is high density polyethylene pipe, plastic pipe, basically, that when exposed to fire, they use 16 feet or 2 sections at the ends of the culverts to avoid having any flammable sections exposed. They would like for engineers to use reinforced concrete pipe. That's basically the guidance of it. And this is guidance from the federal government, federal levels. And this was signed into an act in 2018. It's basically called the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, DRRA for short. And this basically gives guidance that they suggest that an evacuation route should withstand likely risks to viability, including flammability and hydrostatic forces, improve durability, strength, and sustainability, and provide for long-term cost savings. So basically, make the right decisions up front so you won't spend more money making repairs in the future or having more casualties, such as, try to avoid the casualties we've had in Paradise.
And Edgar, if I may, as Edgar mentioned, this is a law that was passed in 2018, but FHWA, which is the Federal Highway Administration, has yet to announce true guidance to the state DOTs across the country. So although there's a law out there, the law isn't being practiced yet. So like Caltrans, which is the DOT that we care about, is also waiting for this to be, actuated. So we look forward to what FHWA will say. There is a few other states out there in the country that are probably impatient and not waiting for the guidance and just going down with different language in their highway design manuals that cares more about flooding and wildfires. So Caltrans appears to just be waiting for the guidance. Happy to talk more about that and don't want to go too deep into that rabbit hole.
And real quick, just to add, in fairness to Caltrans, the most recent fire, Calder Fire out in Lake Tahoe, it did affect some culverts that run under Highway 50. And Caltrans has taken the initiative of evaluating all culverts around the area, even if they weren't damaged, in order to assess the risk. And if there's any risk, they are replacing it with non-flammable product or culvert pipe, which is concrete pipe. But they are doing their due diligence. But as Gean said, it's a slow process where, it hasn't reached every district.
Edgar, if you want, I can take the next couple slides here. This is a graphic that I got from the NOAA. And this is I think it's a year old now or close to it. So this is $1 billion weather and climate disaster. So this considers all your natural disasters. This is when Mother Nature is just very angry. And obviously in our beautiful state of California, we care, we're concerned mostly about wildfires. Yes, there's flooding, but wildfires is the big issue that we have. And if you look at the map across the state, there's all these different types of natural disasters that are out there. And when natural disasters occur, the federal government mostly gets involved and provides assistance, financial assistance. And when there's financial assistance, I do appreciate the government getting involved, but every time I hear about that, I think about my tax dollars. I think about that tax dollar or that big chunk of money that I'm supposed to get gets taken away, and who knows where it goes. But if it's a natural disaster and helping one another, okay. But that's a lot of my tax dollars that I wish I had kept back. And there's a reason why that I'm complaining about that with you all today. So that's a good segue to this next slide here that we'll switch over. And there's another graphic in that same report. This is the Natural Hazard Mitigation Saves Interim Report that came out June of 2018. And I'm just going to read out this graphic to all of you. So this is the National Benefit Cost Ratio, or the BCR per peril. So if there's a river flood, it would take 7 times as much money to repair it as opposed to just building it right the first time. That's a phrase you'll hear a lot of good contractors say, build it right the first time. For wind, it's 5 to 1. You could have built it with the right materials and maybe hire the right structural engineer. It won't fail and you'll save 20%. Earthquakes, that's a 3 to 1 ratio. And maybe that's lower because we already have good building codes. But the last one here, WUI fires. For beyond code requirements, that's 4-to-1 ratio or 3-to-1. So that 6-to-1 up top, that's the average. But you could say in our topic here, it's a 3-to-1 ratio, right? So you can build it right the first time, or you can spend triple that amount. So what does that mean? If there's a culvert that came underneath a very busy highway, Caltrans or any other DOT, maybe it's a county or city, will close that freeway down, interrupt economic development, rebuild that roadway, rebuild that culvert, and guess who gets to pay for it? We all do as taxpayers. So I get irked a little bit when I hear about agencies putting in the same failed material with the same material. It's almost like we're waiting for that to fail again. So what are we doing, right? Edgar threw the analogy about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So the reason why we like to talk about this is because we need to do something different. We need to do better, smarter, and I look forward to what we do, together. So I've got a few more slides on this. Just as some notes here, the average is 6-to-1, but in our world of wildfires, you could say it's 3-to-1 for federally funded projects or emergency projects. This is probably my favorite video that encapsulates everything that I just said. And after that, we have a few more things that we wanted to show that what we did last week.
Recent natural disasters have exposed a critical problem with America's existing infrastructure. Our roads, buildings, and highways haven't been built to be resilient to the natural disasters that we are likely to face this century. It's not just existing infrastructure that needs help. New infrastructure should be built to be resilient to future catastrophes as well. Too often, the hazards that we experienced in the past guide how new infrastructure is built. But it's critical to consider new and potential threats that could arise in the future. Failing to plan for future risks could lead to costly repairs or catastrophic failures and may reduce the infrastructure's expected lifespan. And when existing roads and bridges are damaged, destroyed, or replaced, they shouldn't be built back to how they were. Instead, they should be built back better than they were originally. It may sound expensive, but every dollar we invest on improving disaster resilience today saves us from spending $6 in the future. That doesn't mean replacing everything overnight, but it does mean embracing a resiliency mindset when building new roads, bridges, or buildings.
Edgar put together a plant tour last week and had a lot of really great guests and even some government officials. Edgar, you want to talk about this event you had?
Yeah, so it's part of what we talk about, like community awareness and engagement. So we have plant tours here and there, and for this tour, we had about 40 attendees, and there was a lot of local agencies. We also had Senator Nielsen present at the plant tour. City of Paradise is part of his district, so he took interest in our plant tour, and he really enjoyed it. He said it was very informative. And we also had the mayor of Folsom. In the picture that you're seeing, what we did, we had two culverts that we sort of buried to give it a visual effect. But one was a concrete pipe and the other one was a plastic culvert. We lit them on fire and just to show the effects, and then get people to think about when wildfires are going and you're going over roads, you would like for them to be resilient and not worry about pipes melting underground and everything, not making it safe for you to travel. I think the next slide, we do have a quick video where we do light up the pipe.
Actually, some states already have that in their DOT as a specification.
Right. Yeah, ingress and egress is very important. If you have a town or municipality that has one major road in and out, and if you have a plastic culvert that happens to burn and the road happens to give and no cars can get in and out, that becomes a big issue as well.
What we did, we put wood chips inside the pipe just to kind of represent some embers.
We lit it up as would happen in a fire, and then the tunnel will also add as an accelerant with the wind.
And one of the things that we have been seeing with wildfires now is that they know like the hot embers stay ahead of the fires. Sometimes even a couple miles ahead, which keeps on starting new fires and stuff like that. So like Steve said, sometimes it'll create a vacuum inside the culvert switch. It'll pull in all those hot ambers, and it'll light up your culvert and stuff like that, depending on what you have in there.
And something to keep in mind also is the HDPE, the polypropylene. Those are essentially petrochemicals in solid form. It's oil in solid form, essentially what it is.
And by the way, we did get clearance from the Air Quality Control Board and the fire department. I made sure to do all our due diligence and stuff.
That's Edgar's handsome voice that you guys are hearing in the back over there. So good job,
I know
Edgar.
some of the specs have it that the ends of the culverts have to have concrete in them. But
I'm going to let this video play out. And if any of you are interested to see a plant tour, see how some of our products are manufactured, please contact either one of us. If you wanted to see this demonstration firsthand, we would happily do this again for you guys.
If anybody knows Wildfire,
And
those are heat sources.
we'll get the clearance again from the local jurisdictions again too, of course. But if you wait a little bit longer, you'll see what happens if in time to these two materials. One of them actually starts to collapse and start to fail. And you guys can all guess which one doesn't do well on the fires. Roberto's going to give you $100 if you get that one right.
We didn't agree to that. They
So
did.
right here, as you can see, hopefully you guys can see my cursor, but the soil around this is collapsing, and actually the material itself is melting away and just kind of going in the atmosphere. Now, I just wanted to point out, like from the surface, if this was a roadway, it would look okay until you had load and this structure would just fail. Now, if you look on the left, the only thing that would happen to this concrete pipe is it might just aesthetically look different, but it can withstand the temperatures that a wildfire has. So I'll let this imagery and the video speak for itself.
The other thing I'll add is even if the road doesn't collapse, that's when the rains come in and they may be able to wash out that soil that no longer has the sleeve to hold it together. And that's another hazard that is post fires that you encounter.
And that actually concludes our presentation. This is our contact information. Happy to have one-on-one conversations with you or your agency or any groups that you guys work with. And just to kind of recap what we had talked about and why we're even talking about this stuff with all of you today is, again, we're just trying to promote the awareness of wildfires and the flammable materials that exist around roadways. It could be handrails, it could be power poles, it could be trees, bushes, and of course the culverts and what's underneath. We think all components around the roadways are just as important for one another. You ignite one, it can ignite the other. And I'm not saying plastic pipe is bad. I'm just saying plastic pipe is bad with fires. And I know that. And we showed that to you all today. We try to encourage engineers, whether it's the county flood control districts or Caltrans, to really do something about these specifications. And we're trying. We know there's only so much that they could do. So we also influence engineers to make some good, resilient-minded decisions, because once again, it's always about public safety and not economics, not about how to make money. It's about how do we save people's lives. And that's paramount to us and should be paramount to everyone. So again, I thank you very much for the opportunity to give this presentation to all of you. And I'll leave it there. If there's any questions, we'll be happy to take them now or in breakout.
Yeah, I have some questions to start off, but Gean, could you go ahead and stop here, if you don't mind? And then, yeah, I'll start with the Q&A right now. So one of the things mentioned in that last video, I heard somebody say something to the effect that, you know, what the plastic is like a flammable material in solid form. Would you mind stop sharing the screen if that's okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. And so when I was a boot firefighter, that's one of the things I learned right away with regard to plastics. You know, as firefighters, we used to consider plastics frozen flammable materials, because once they get to their melting point, you know, they act very much like diesel and other flammable liquids that have a high heat output or high BTU output. So that's important. One of the questions I do want to ask you guys is, in your studies or research on this, what are we looking at in terms of time? You know, with an impending fire, a fire approaching a plastic culvert, what's the relationship between the time that the product starts to fail and the ability for people to evacuate? I get that post-fire, it's a big deal, replacing costs and all that, and building back better. But how critical is it in the early stages of a fire when people are evacuating? Can you guys speak to that, either of you?
Yeah, I could a bit. I don't have the exact number on what the burn rate is offhand. There is literature out there that'll tell you that. I can tell you based on the temperatures from the campfire, I would say it's within seconds, almost instantly. I mean, it was in the upwards of 1,000 degrees, and that you can, it's like putting ice in hot water, like into your analogy, Roberta, about frozen flammable material. It is just like that. The other problem that we see is that sometimes engineers look at roadways as fire blocks or fire walls, which is a good idea, right? Especially if you get rid of debris along the sides, but then they forget about that wind tunnel that's created with the culvert. So I think engineers need to be very wary about that firewall because they're creating a fire tunnel with culverts, regardless of the material type, right? So there's literally a vacuum effect that happens with air movement. So I'd be happy to research that more and share that with you of what the fire or burn rate is. I think it's very interesting. It's fast, I can tell you that.
You know, it seems like the worst scenario of all is you get a fire, you get some wind, you've got a plastic culvert, and then because it's a riparian way, you can't get in there and do a lot of, you know, fuels reduction in that space. You've got like a blowtorch blowing this fire through this thing into an area that's going to have vegetation because it has to.
Right.
Part of the riparian way. So that's really, really.
Yeah, there's one component that I failed to mention during the presentation, and it had to do with, you know, I think we're lucky that some of those roadways did not collapse, at least not that we're aware of. But I do know that in the recovery for the town of Paradise, they had to block a lot of those roads down because they were plastic culverts. Just like the image I showed with that cross section from the study, even some of the major arteries were blocked. So when I visited, I believe it was in February, there's truckloads and truckloads of, you know, old burned trees that were getting removed, but they weren't able to use the entire large roadways because of the failed culverts that Mark Maddox had talked about. So I could tell you that it slowed down the recovery process for sure. But going back to your original question, I'll be happy to research that for you.
Well, also with what you just said, Gean, I'm going to kind of piggyback onto that with the idea that, and Esther, this is important for you as well, I think, and you, Kaylin, too, moving forward with local CWPPs. I think that historically we're probably overlooking plastic culverts as a potential asset at risk as part of the roadway. You know, when we do community wildfire protection plans, one of the things we do in that process, that analysis, is we look at, okay, how resilient are the things we have, and, you know, how well are these things going to hold up in a fire, and is this something we need to consider protecting as an infrastructure asset at risk? And if we look at these things in the future, one of the things I'm going to be paying more attention to is the roadways that have plastic culverts as part of that structure. You know, it's like, wow, okay, this is plastic culvert. This might be something we want to be aware of with the CWPP, and maybe identify that as something we may want to change out over time. And also, with that said, what are the difference in costs, you guys, between plastic and concrete? Even if concrete headers in the first 15, 20 feet into that transition with concrete.
Happy to take that question too, and I have a pretty good answer for you. And I'm a very honest guy. I would say that the material itself, if you were to go to Home Depot, not that you could go to Home Depot to buy some of these materials, but if you were to go to a store to get it, the cost of the plastic pipe is about half the cost of the concrete pipe. So yeah, if you look at it from a material perspective, yeah, let's just save some money. You know, if you're a homeowner and you wanted to go get material, you can go get a PVC pipe or a copper pipe, right? You can get the cheaper one and save some money, but that thing might melt, you know, and what have you. We all know that. But what we like to talk about is how much it costs to install it. The total installed cost is very comparable. There's a lot of variables with respect to where it's installed, how big the culvert is itself. But if it's a culvert for a public works agency, it's very comparable. And the reason why it is because the installation cost of plastic pipe is a lot more sensitive. I know this doesn't relate to fires, but if you drive over the roadways and see potholes or kind of indentations in the road, that's mainly because pipes not being installed correctly. And that applies to both materials, but it's just a lot more sensitive for plastic pipes or metal pipes because it's flexible in nature. So the short answer is it's comparable, but there's a lot of factors as to, you know, at some points and what locations, which is more expensive.
And then you just touched on something I wanted to ask about as well, as the steel culvert. You know, I wonder how things compare to steel culvert. Is with regard to fire resistance and longevity, I guess, as well. How does the steel culvert compare? Because
yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna take a jab at our friends in the metal sector too. I would say our foes from the plastic, metal, or concrete. We're obviously all competing with one another, but I'll take a jab at them real quick. So we have an agency in County of San Diego that calls it crappy metal pipe. They no longer use that material because it's the cause of most of the sinkholes in San Diego. That's one reason why most engineers choose not to use that material today. The other part of it too is from a wildfire perspective, if a corrugated metal pipe, or CMP for short, were to catch on fire, it actually would perform okay. It won't disintegrate like it would plastic, but the bituminous coating that's inside of the pipe melts away and just falls downstream when the rain comes. So that chemical is just probably just, you know, gets into the groundwater or just goes into some waterway. But the problem with, say, an agency like Caltrans is they have to go back in and put that coating around that pipe again or inside of that pipe. Because if they don't, that pipe will then start to rust. And then you'll have to go rebuild it entirely. So that's the bigger problem. It's not as frozen as plastic pipe, right? It doesn't have that plastic melting point like, you know, what as it does. It would perform better, but it has its cons to it with the coating.
Let's see, what else was I going to ask you? I was going to add, Trevor from Sonoma Valley. What are your thoughts about adding to the fire attack maps, you know, places that have plastic pipe after hearing this information? Is that something we should consider in the future when we update those?
I think it would be beneficial to understand what portions of the infrastructure we would need to assess and check from a accessibility standpoint. At least target hazards of areas to protect, especially in those portions of the infrastructure that are going to be the highest of priority. But yeah, I can't see a reason not to have that information.
Yeah, if you're driving a fire engine across that sucker and the fire just blew through there, it'd be like, wait a second, why did we break the road when we drove the fire engine over it? What just happened? That could be pretty wicked. Well, thanks, Trevor, for that. And then cost difference we already asked about. There's a question in the Q&A. Do you know if any of the federal infrastructure bill funding can be used for replacing culverts with non-flammable materials or non-combustible materials?
I'll take that one too. The answer is yes, and it has happened. Even the town of Paradise, they used FEMA dollars to replace. Initially, they replaced their plastic culverts with plastic because they needed to get the roadways back up. And if they had gone to replace it with another material, it's more paperwork. It's difficult to get the quote unquote upgrade. What other states have done is taken that amount of dollars and then found the money locally. But the town of Paradise at the time did not have additional dollars to go rebuild the thing. So they had to resort to putting in the same materials. And I understand that. Now that they've generated public works dollars, they're now replacing the plastic pipes with concrete pipe. And a lot of those pipes they actually got from Edgar's company, Forterra. So if you think about that for a second, just tax dollars in general, plastic culvert melted, federal tax dollars that we paid for replaced it, and then they use more tax dollars to replace that with concrete pipe. So that's like a double, triple whammy if you were to ask me. You heard Mark Maddox say it himself. We should have just installed concrete pipe, and they never would have had this discussion in the first place. So the answer is yes. It's an unfortunate yes.
Given the budget, what do you guys think about just looking at the hydrology calcs and maybe just oversizing that? If all you can afford is plastic pipe, if you've got the area to work in, oversize the pipe based on the hydrology calcs, and then later on just leave it with concrete. Would that work?
It's kind of the other way around. Like in a sanitary sewer world, you can say like a plastic material performs better. So sometimes you'll have a concrete pipe that's lined with plastic.
Yeah.
That's a composite material, right? That's what that is. But lining something with concrete on the inside is very expensive.
I mean, sleeve it. You just cover
well, I mean,
it.
it can be done.
It seems simple, but yeah.
It's just expensive, right? And also your idea of oversizing things. Engineers work in a way where it says, hey, we got to engineer this to be as economical as possible. Don't oversize it. Don't make it too resilient. Even with the earthquake analogy, some engineers think, hey, we just have to save enough lives, but we know we're not going to go build a bridge out of titanium steel that's never going to fail. Of course, there's not enough dollars in the world to do that. So economics play a big pivotal factor in these decisions. And of course, I'm sure there was a great engineer that chose to use a plastic pipe in the high fire zone and just said, hey, as long as we can just replace it, hey, we got FEMA dollars, don't worry about it. I'm sure there's some of that psychological thinking behind it, but we need to change that way of thinking, right? We're gonna run out of tax dollars one day. I think I heard today on the news, they just increased our budget, our debt to $2.5 trillion, something like that. So it sounds like we're going down the same rabbit hole and same path of just using more of our dollars that we don't have. It's, yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions? Just go ahead and shout out. We're a small enough group. And I don't think we'll break out into the smaller groups. I'm just going to open it up for discussion.
I do see another one in the chat from Esther. Esther, nice to meet you. I'll address your question. I don't know too much about Cwpp, but I'm really interested here today because you guys obviously are talking about that a lot. But your question is, what recommendations should we include in the Cwpp in terms of covert assets? I would definitely suggest reaching out to agencies like Caltrans who have a dedicated covert inspection program coordinator. Caltrans inspects their roadways culverts every 2 years, at least that's what they're told to do. And they do have a good database that identifies where all of the culverts are, what material it is, and what the condition of the culvert is as well. I don't know if every local city agency does the same practice, but that would be a good place to start. I know most cities have an engineer that's dedicated to emergency evacuations and something along those lines. But I think asset management is very important, especially when you're thinking about defensible roadways and defensible spaces.
Yeah. The other experience we've had with that I've had with funding projects too is it's really challenging for us to get funding for infrastructure like roadways. We can get funding for fuels reduction pretty readily, but when it comes to putting funding towards, paving a trail to make it a better evacuation route or things like that, let alone, fixing the crossings on that road, or building them to a higher standard. It can be pretty challenging. We're competing with other projects for that kind of money.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to say that and one of the reasons why I didn't even go address that in the CWPP was because it's just such a big topic, and you can't get grant funding for that, right? That has to be dedicated funding from the county or the city or whatever. And so it's just, but we can definitely make recommendations, and one of the recommendations could be that we need to develop a resilient or wildfire, what did you call it? From one of your first slides, it was the wildfire fuel roadside.
I must have said something good.
Yeah, it was like the first or second slide. And I was just like, well, we need that plan for the entire county. whatever that.
Yeah, it's like defensible space along the roadway or something.
Correct.
Yeah, defensible roadways.
Defensible roadways. That's what it was. We need a defensible roadways plan for the entire county. Yeah, and that could be one of our recommendations, is that somebody take that on. Somebody, that's definitely something that's needed, because it wouldn't just include the culverts. It would include the fuel reduction along the roads.
Structure hardening. You're hardening the structure, i.e. the road.
Correct, exactly. Hardening the structure, yeah. And would include signage and everything. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
So this came from literature that came out of the governor's office. Let me show you that cover page again.
I just downloaded. Yeah. So
I think I shared that in the chat for folks if they wanted to load it.
It's a really good read. I'm proud that our local state is going in the right direction. And also from a engineering perspective, everyone here probably has heard of ASTM. There is an ASTM right now that's being voted on by a handful of engineers across the country about having a standard about what to do in extreme weather events, how to design something in wildfires, how to design in high flood zones. You all know that our category 5 is not the highest anymore. It's soon going to be a 6. And even that video that I showed at the very end of the presentation, that graphic of that tornado guy, it said category 6. There is no category 6, but there needs to be a higher level now, because we're seeing bigger and bigger problems. So anyhow, not to go down too deep into that rabbit hole, engineers are thinking about it now. We need to hurry up because we've already built a lot of our developments, right? So as we build new developments, we got to build it smarter, better, etc. I'll leave it there. Caitlin, your question about ASTM, I think it stands for the American Standards and Testing of Materials, something along those lines. I put
it on the text group.
I
only said it to Roberta, sorry.
Yeah, so that it's a standard for basically anything. There's all types of manufacturing, engineering, you name it. They go through that standard. So that's agreed upon by engineers, industry, and other stakeholders. So it standardizes how to do things properly.
Yeah, it's American Society for Testing of Materials.
There's a website. I put the website too in case you want to.
I believe the topic is ASTM E60, which is the topic of the resilient standards to how to design roadways and culverts. If those of you that are interested, my organization, ACPA, is actually going to put on a seminar in February on that very topic. And the engineer behind it, which is a third-party engineering firm, is going to give a presentation to a lot of DOTs around the country, along with other stakeholders about that topic. But if you wanted to hear it, I'm happy to talk about it with you as well. Just give me a shout.
DOTs is Department of Transportation, just
Yeah. Oh, I know. We live in such an alphabet soup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically Caltrans and stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, you guys, thank you very much for the presentation. And,
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure
thank all
talking
you
to you
guys
all.
for hanging out, Jane and Kaylin and Jim and Trevor and all you guys. Thanks and happy holidays to all you guys. Appreciate it. All right. We'll see you guys. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.